If you're going to San Francisco, be sure to wear some flowers in your hair.
Welcome to my new Shithole series, where we examine how late-stage progressivism is turning our once beautiful cities into complete shitholes, and in the case of San Francisco, a literal shithole.
There's more feces on the sidewalks than I've ever seen, you know, growing up here. That was something that wasn't the norm.
Than you've ever seen.
Than I've ever seen, for sure.
We surveyed 153 blocks of downtown San Francisco. We spent 3 days walking up and down every street, inspecting more than 20 miles of the city. We found trash on every block, 303 piles of feces, and 100 needles.
There's a website where residents can log complaints with the city. You can go on it at any time and find thousands and thousands of reports about feces. New ones are filed roughly every 20 minutes. In one case, a quote, big bag of poo filled with approximately 20 pounds of feces that was oozing out was discarded on a San Francisco sidewalk.
I need a third world country, but it's not as bad as this.
Dr. Riley has researched some of the dirtiest slums in the world, but believes contamination levels in parts of San Francisco may now be even worse.
Much higher than what we see in places like Brazil or Kenya or India.
But why should anyone need to shit on the streets when there are 82 Starbucks in San Francisco? Someone should start a leafleting campaign amongst the homeless, letting them know that Starbucks is now America's biggest public toilet. San Francisco also has the honor of being America's largest unsupervised outdoor mental hospital. Aside from turds, something else that lines the streets of this liberal utopia is used needles. Lots of them.
A Sheener class walked right by nearly a dozen drug needles.
And who's responsible for that? It couldn't be the leftist government that runs the city itself, could it? Surely they wouldn't be handing out millions of needles to drug addicts every year. Surely not. I mean, yeah, it's them. At a cost of over $500,000, the city's health department hands out 400,000 syringes a month every month. That's nearly 5 million a year. That's so common that during filming for NBC about this very problem, the new mayor walked right by a guy prepping a needle. In the name of reducing infection from contaminated needles, the health department boasts that it has reduced the number of new HIV infections among people who inject drugs from 106 in 2010 to 38 in 2016. Whoop-de-doo! Out of 400,000 needles distributed monthly, 246,000 come back, leaving 154,000 needles on the streets, in parks and playgrounds. All because the government is giving them out for free, keeping drug addicts mired in an endless cycle of dependency and delinquency. But they've installed new trash cans, because my first thought, if I was simultaneously crapping my pants and coming up on a fevered heroin high, would be my civic duty to recycle responsibly. San Francisco is set to open staffed indoor injection sites.
That's where people can shoot up their own drugs indoors under supervision.
And while this does reduce overdose deaths, it's just a band-aid on a gaping wound. When they opened these in Vancouver, many of the drug addicts just congregated nearby. They were still on the streets. Many people assert that this does nothing to fix the problem and just encourages heroin use. And are you happy that your tax dollars are going towards the government providing a safe space for junkies? But hey, as ratty as San Francisco is, there's no denying the magic. The magic in this case being an ugly modern art installation based on Black Lives Matter's demonstrably false hands up, don't shoot narrative. So magical. Crime is also rampant in this progressive utopia, being higher than 92.7% of the United States. And although they've been reduced somewhat more recently thanks to increased police foot patrols, car break-ins are still at epidemic levels, with 30,000 last year alone.
I call San Francisco the utopian petri dish of America. We try out every crazy liberal idea there, and then sometimes they spread to other cities.
Ashbury, once a hippie paradise, now looks like this.
Violent brawls in broad daylight. The San Francisco neighborhood where crime is getting so bad, people are scared to step outside their own homes.
A major medical convention that has held its event in the city since the 80s and brings in $40 million every time it does, announced that it was abandoning San Francisco and cancelling the event because its members didn't feel safe walking the streets. Gee, I wonder why.
If you come to San Francisco.
Listen to what frightened tourists say about San Francisco. Is this normal, or am I in a bad part of town? Just walked past numerous homeless off their faces, screaming and running all over the sidewalk near Twitter HQ, and then a murder scene. Wife is scared to leave hotel now. A resident responded, I'm honestly hoping tourists will realise how shitty this city has become and stop coming. Maybe the loss of income will finally push the city to stop allowing the rampant drug dealing and homeless people treating the entire city like their toilet. You see things on the streets that are just not humane, said Kevin Carroll, Executive Director of the Hotel Council of San Francisco. People coming into hotels saying, what is going on out there? They're just shocked. People say, I love your city, I love your restaurants, but I'll never come back.
They feel their safety is at risk because they're seeing so many people that are having issues.
They see people laying on the streets, there's petty crimes going on in the street.
I left my heart in San Francisco.
Why does San Francisco have a massive homeless population? Because it has the highest housing prices in the United States, which is exacerbated by it being one of the hardest cities in the United States in which to build houses. So leftist micromanagement by means of onerous regulation and crippling bureaucracy is driving the city's affordable housing shortage and homeless problem. Is San Francisco's new Democratic mayor going to do anything to fix this? Don't hold your breath. In her very first interview, she said she wouldn't enforce any penalties against people who poo in the streets.
Are you talking about harsher penalties?
I didn't express anything about a penalty.
She seems more concerned with protecting illegal immigrants from ICE than protecting her own citizens from crime and degradation.
The goal is to treat our immigrant community the same as if they are a real part of our community, whether they're our citizen or not.
If you got word of an imminent ICE raid and standing up and warning the community about that?
I think I could, yes.
Oh, and now they get the right to vote too. They've also upped spending on homeless services by 40% over the last 5 years. Yet homeless rates remain the same. Whatever they're doing, it's clearly not working.
He says multiple clients refused to enter his salon because this woman was defecating in front of it.
When you call the police, they say there's absolutely nothing that can be done.
He feels like he's watching the city center die and wants Mayor Ed Lee to do something now.
San Francisco is a shithole for 3 main reasons. 1, laws against public drug use and public defecation are not being enforced. 2, the government is incentivizing this lifestyle, not disincentivizing it. 3, there's no expectation on the underclass to take responsibility for their behavior. When the people who run your city have a political motivation to keep people trapped in dependency and on welfare, which in turn fosters dysfunctionality, poor behavior, and a lack of self-respect, then your city's problems with the consequences of people having no self-respect, being dysfunctional, and behaving poorly will only continue to get worse. If you subsidize a culture of degeneracy and debasement, you make that an option for people. If you incentivize shitting on the streets and injecting yourself with heroin, don't be surprised when people shit on the streets and inject themselves with heroin. How about helping poor people lift themselves out of dependency, not doing everything in your power to keep them locked into it? San Francisco spends an average $40,000 every single year on every single homeless person. Instead of spending money giving needles to junkies, why not spend that money on paying them to clean the streets? Why not spend that money on paying them to pick up the needles? Give them store credit cards in return for Ziploc bags full of syringes. Why not spend that money on training them to build affordable houses? Is San Francisco the model globalist city with the super rich ensconced in their high-rise luxury bubbles?
You see, they're too busy trying to undo the election. They don't have time to clean up the city in which they live. They never walk in the city. You think Nancy Pelosi walks in downtown San Francisco? Are you crazy? Do you think Jerry Brown walks in San Francisco? Are you nuts?
Safely protected from a growing underclass who become increasingly poor, degenerate, diseased, and mentally ill, as a direct consequence of the government accommodating, rewarding, and funding all their destructive vices. Is this the destiny of pathological progressivism gone too far? Is this our collective future? So in answer to your question,
If you come to San Francisco.
No.
So recently I produced a video called The Vandalization of Star Trek due to poor writing decisions, political correctness, and social justice themes. But there's been plenty of all of that in the Star Wars franchise of late. I wanted to bring up some of these things in my recent Star Wars The Last Jedi review, but I thought it best to focus on these things in the context of the last few films and produce a dedicated video about it. I could begin with the truly awful prequels, but as I've only ever had the stomach to watch those films once, and they didn't really have much social justice garbage in them, thankfully, I think I'll focus purely on the three most recent films, beginning with Star Wars The Force Awakens. One of the major gripes I had with the direction the producers took with that film was separating the three original cast members so that they had no actual screen time together. Han Solo and Princess Leia did, of course, but Luke Skywalker literally only has one non-speaking cameo scene at the end of the movie. What's more, and as per usual with Hollywood movies that contain a very left-wing bias, there's always an anti-family, anti-marriage sentiment, and The Force Awakens also succumbs to this. Relationships always seem to break down, and everyone gets divorced and estranged. After apparently going off to live happily ever after at the end of The Return of the Jedi, Han and Leia are now no longer together. Their relationship hit the skids, and though they're still on good terms, they're done as a couple. It's very sad, to be honest, and it really desecrates their character development and the memory of the original films. Though I'm sure Harrison Ford wanted out of the franchise, his death just feels cheap and unnecessary. But more frustratingly than that is just how poorly the relationship between Han and Leia is actually dealt with. Their separation was largely motivated because of their son Ben Solo, aka Kylo Ren, the film's principal villain. The story arc for Han and Leia with respect to their failed relationship is built upon their guilt for poorly raising and failing their son, and him turning out to be a mass-murdering psychopath who'd fallen to the dark side. I don't know about you, but I think this is a really poor treatment of such sacred and beloved characters. Their final days spent having to deal with this irreconcilable heartbreak and tragedy. Kylo Ren didn't have to be Ben Solo. He didn't have to be their son. He could have been anyone's son. He could have been written with a completely different origin story. But I'll speak more about Kylo later. The second and most talked about complaint people have with The Force Awakens is with the character of Rey. Now, I really like the actress Daisy Ridley. I think she's a wonderful actress with enormous talent and great range. But the character of Rey is a total Mary Sue. Despite having no prior technical experience, she can fly the Millennium Falcon because, after all, feminism and you gotta get more chicks into STEM, right guys? Affirmative action and all that. She's also able to access the Force and is a dab hand with a lightsaber without any training, despite the fact that it took several films for Luke Skywalker to become sufficiently competent. She's also able to beat up guys twice her size in a manner similar to Jyn Erso, which, if I'm honest, is never truly believable in films. I know it's fantasy, but I think this is honestly why some people seem to think we need more women in the military, despite the fact that women have, less than, I think it's only about 48% the upper body strength of a man. But that's a minor gripe, I know. There's even a scene early on in the film where the white knight that is Finn tries to help her escape, and she tells him that she doesn't need him to hold her hand. It's so cringe-inducing and obviously put in there as a deliberate feminist female empowerment message, And you're continuously beaten over the head with that kind of propaganda throughout the film. Both The Force Awakens and Rogue One suffer from very politically correct casting motivated by J.J. Abrams. In a quote I've read several times, he previously said of the casting of The Force Awakens, "We wrote these characters, but when we went to cast it, one of the things I had felt, having been to the Emmys a couple of times, you look around that room and you see the whitest fucking room in the history of time. It's just unbelievably white. And I thought, we're casting this show and we have an opportunity to do anything we want. Why not cast the show with actors of color? Like, not for sure, and if we can't find the actors who are great, we shouldn't, but why not make that effort? Because it wasn't written that way, and isn't that the cooler version of doing this as opposed to saying, this is an urban show? It fucking kills me when they call something an urban movie, like it's a separate thing, like it's that thing over there. So you'll notice in these films that male roles are generally somewhat undermined, but in particular white men. So it's no wonder that the two primary characters in Force Awakens are a white woman and a black man. Harrison Ford's character is killed off, of course, and just like with UNIT in Doctor Who, Resistance female characters all have to be placed in prominent roles of authority. Princess Leia is now a general, for example. This kind of politically biased casting is most notable in Rogue One and The Last Jedi. In Rogue One, the primary character of Jyn Erso is, as I described in my Rogue One review, she's dull, two-dimensional, and has one gear. 1,000-mile, intense, melancholic, constipated stare. That's kind of reminiscent of Black Widow, but without the occasional sass. She's boring and forgettable. She doesn't learn anything. She gets a brief reconciliation with her father. That's about it. Now, I'm all for strong female leads, but this character isn't female. That's the insulting aspect of this. Hollywood thinks femininity is patriarchal or something, so chicks have to be masculinized in order to be considered strong, because they don't see femininity as being a virtue, which is actually insulting to women. Girls don't aspire to be these kinds of heroines. Boys aspire to be these kinds of stoic action heroes. Is it any wonder we live in a world of such utterly disturbing gender confusion where masculinity in men is shamed now? This character of Jyn is a dead behind-the-eyes robot. Recast this character with a man and nothing changes. Gender is fluid after all, right? No, it's not, thank God. So the good guy team in Rogue One are comprised of a woman, an Hispanic man, an Asian guy, an Indian guy with an English accent, Forrest Whitaker, who's obviously black, and a Pacific Islander guy. The only prominent white character is Orson Krennic, who is, wouldn't you know it, the principal bad guy. Yes, white men are bad. Virtue signal to the max. Have to process that white guilt, right? Once again, the leading authority figure for the good guys is Senator Mon Mothma, yet another female character. In The Last Jedi, things really go full SJW in terms of female authority figures. General Leia is back in charge, and when she's injured, the rather inept Vice Admiral Amilyn Holdo is left in charge. Not only does she look like a stereotypical purple-haired SJW, but her decisions are irrational, emotional, and downright irresponsible, and she fails to take any responsibility for her failures. Poe Dameron, BB-8, Finn, and another new character engage in a very necessary mutiny in order to develop an actually sensible and practical plan that won't end up getting every Resistance ship destroyed. And the best Holdo and the recovered Leia can do at the end of the film is to pull rank, with Leia simply shooting Dameron because he disobeyed her. But she's not an unreasonable autocrat or anything. Dameron's ideas actually made sense. Holdo's plan jeopardized the lives of the entire Resistance fleet, and as predicted by Dameron, the First Order began picking off the Resistance vessels one by one. The two obnoxious female characters of Leia and Holdo have a right good chuckle about Dameron, calling him a hothead because, of course, masculinity's so toxic, right? Let's choose the feels over an actual practical plan that would minimize the deaths of Resistance lives while simultaneously crippling the bad guys. Despite being the protagonists in this story, it does make it very difficult to root for the Resistance. And as for the antagonists, well, the First Order are made to look clownish, buffoonish, and in no way threatening and completely incompetent. But they are commanded by a white man, so obviously they have to be depicted in this way, right? The best Holdo and Leia could come up with after emasculating Dameron was to escape to a planet, while many of their ships got blown to bits in space, and where the First Order would have them cornered. It took Luke Skywalker and Rey to help them escape again. All of this could have been avoided had they just followed the plan of the mutineers. The character of Luke Skywalker has also been massively compromised, spending his days broken-hearted, downbeat, defeated, world-weary, and cynical on some island somewhere. His faith in the Jedi broken following his failure and regret when it came to Ben Solo. Not exactly an existence befitting a legendary and beloved character of the franchise. And the actor Mark Hamill seems to resent this direction, also saying in an interview, When I read 8, I told Rian Johnson, the writer-director, I fundamentally disagree with virtually everything you've decided about my character. He also described Han Solo's death in Force Awakens as a great missed opportunity. At best now, we can hope that Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill will appear on screen together as Force ghosts. And it's been announced that following the death of Carrie Fisher, the filmmakers will not be using CGI to bring her character back. So that means that The Force Awakens really was a massive missed opportunity where we could have had the original 3 characters on screen together. What a shame. Finally, the character of Kylo Ren. While played very well by Adam Driver, ultimately, he's a very poorly written character. He just does bad stuff for no reason, and he didn't really give into the dark side in the same way that Anakin Skywalker did. His fall to Snoke's influence was so unjustifiable to the point where it kind of robbed the character of any real agency and where we couldn't really relate to him and his struggle. It certainly wasn't his parents who drove him to the dark side, so his emergence as a villain is just one of those pet peeves I have with Star Wars in general. He fell to the dark side. You don't need to overthink it anymore. He's just a bad guy now. Don't ask too many questions as to why he fell to the dark side. Ooh, isn't he evil as he does evil things? Now, though I wouldn't call myself a massive Star Wars fan, I do really enjoy this franchise. I really like Star Wars as entertaining cinema. But I can smell political correctness and SJW material a mile away. It's sad to say that this wonderful franchise is now as much a victim of all of this as the likes of Doctor Who and Star Trek. But those are just my thoughts on where the Star Wars franchise has gone recently. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Over 500,000 people have signed a petition saying they reject Muslim immigration into their country. What kind of bigoted, backward, white trash would dare do such a thing? Oh, it's South Koreans. Over 500,000 South Koreans. They even carried signs in the streets saying, "Don't be like Europe," and "Fake refugees go home right now." This was all prompted by 1,000 Muslim Yemenis arriving as tourists on a small resort island, then claiming asylum. When asked why he opposed Islamic immigration, one South Korean professor said his main concerns were pedo grooming gangs and terrorism. He also said that Muslims just don't integrate. He said, quote, "We have seen on television just how many problems are caused when a country like Germany or the UK is relaxed about immigration and the damage it does to societies." What damage? What's he talking about? I mean, it's not like teenage girls are being raped and strangled by migrants in Germany. It's not like when AFD members try to have a minute's silence in Parliament for these victims. It gets booed and heckled by leftists and Green Party members. It's not like this young lady, a pro-refugee activist, was abducted and murdered by a Moroccan migrant in Germany. It's not like Christian girls are being bullied, beaten and abused in schools across Germany. It's not like a head teacher in one school said the solution to this was to cover them up with a hijab. It's not like the president of Germany's Teachers Association warned that anti-Semitic attacks and ISIS beheading videos were spreading like wildfire through German schools. It's not like Angela Merkel herself admitted in 2011, quote, "We have to accept the number of crimes committed by migrants is especially high."
Aber wir müssen akzeptieren, dass die Zahl der Straftaten bei jugendlichen Migranten besonders hoch ist.
Before inviting in 2 million more migrants, including an ISIS-supporting Tunisian who tried to make a biological weapon in his own home. It's not like the media asserted Donald Trump was a liar for saying that Germany had problems with migrant crime.
The United States will not be a migrant camp. You look at what's happening in Europe, you look at what's happening in other places, we can't allow that to happen to the United States, not on my watch.
While the media itself reported that migrant crime in Germany, specifically violent crime, was soaring. While 90% of the rise in violent crime was attributable to refugees, according to the government's own numbers. It's not like migrant crime targeting German citizens has risen 23% in a single year, according to the government's own numbers. It's not like Jews are being whipped and abused by migrants on the streets of Berlin.
Ich filme dich.
It's not like German police had to flee in panic when 200 migrants rioted after they tried to deport a failed asylum seeker. It's not like Germany is enforcing gender segregation to please their new inhabitants. That wouldn't be very progressive, would it? It's not like students in Spain were kicked out of their own homes so that migrants arriving on the Aquarius ship with contagious diseases could be accommodated. That didn't happen either. It's not like migrants in Italy are barbecuing dogs because they say it's normal where they come from. It's not like a Syrian migrant stabbed his 21-year-old Swedish neighbour 130 times, then beheaded her because she made a racist remark. It's not like Germans are being told to avoid being stabbed by migrants by not letting them get too close.
Und Bürgerinnen und Bürger werden einfach sensibler sein müssen. Man muss nicht unbedingt Menschen nah an sich ranlassen.
It's not like women in Sweden are being told by police not to go out at night to avoid being raped. It's not like 1,400 underage Dutch girls are being forced into sex slavery each year by migrant background males. It's not like 93% of sex crimes in Finland committed by migrants are committed by migrants from Islamic countries. It's not like parts of Paris have been turned into a complete dump. 400,000 illegal immigrants living in one suburb alone in tent cities surrounded by piles of trash. Places like Saint-Denis where basic law and order is falling apart. It's not like Muslim activists are literally renaming streets in France from where the first Crusades were launched. It's not like Nantes had 5 straight nights of rioting by Afghan migrants, with a petrol station, shops, a community library and a school all being set on fire. It's not like migrants in France are threatening to rape female truck drivers as an intimidation tactic as they try to get to the UK, while attempting to hijack trucks by setting up burning roadblocks. It's not like an 87-year-old French woman was brutally raped for 2 hours in Lyon by a Moroccan migrant who later tried to claim the assault was consensual. And it's not like President Macron announced that mass migration was Europe's destiny and that hundreds of millions of Africans will continue to flood into the continent for many years to come. But why does any of that matter when this migrant in France scaled a building to save a baby? I guess that means we should just get rid of borders and laws. Why this dude didn't grab the baby? Probably best not to ask questions. Probably also best not to ask questions about why after an illegal immigrant from Niger beheaded a 1-year-old baby and killed her mother in Hamburg, German authorities responded by raiding the apartment of the guy who posted a video of the murder scene online. Probably best not to ask any more questions about this on talk shows, because Germany's Cultural Council wants to ban them entirely for a year because they dared discuss migrant-related problems. Rest assured though, ads like this will continue to be broadcast.
Ich auch. Ist doch hübsch. Enjoy difference, start tolerance.
Super easy. Mit Katjes. Da ist alles ohne tierische Gelatine. Achte mal drauf.
But maybe commercials aren't enough. Maybe we need to mass drug the population to make them more accepting of migrants. Probably best not to ask why Germany's vice-chancellor says refugees coming to Germany are more German than actual Germans who criticise their government's migrant policy. Probably best not to make any more YouTube videos about Germany's migrant problem, because they get banned in Germany. Probably best not to wave German flags because it upsets Angela Merkel. Probably best not to ask why Christian refugees are returning to Syria because they're shocked at the number of Muslim migrants in Europe who have embraced ISIS.
Die EG ist überfahrt.
Probably best not to ask why refugee charity workers who once supported bringing in migrants now admit they were totally wrong and are moving to Poland. Probably best not to ask why migrants on boats are threatening to kill the people who rescued them because they refuse to take them to northern European welfare havens. Probably best not to make fun of Islam on social media, because as many Swedish citizens have found to their cost, it usually ends up in arrest, interrogation and conviction. But Freddie Mercury was a refugee. Elon Musk was an economic migrant. I mean, there's got to be some iconic pop stars and inventors amongst this lot, right? Your educated, middle-class, skilled immigrant friend is nice, so why not just erase all border controls?
What's up? Money! Money!
After all, our population is dying off. We need labour. We need tax-paying workers. It's not like 85% of refugees in Holland remain unemployed 4 years later. It's not like more than half of German welfare recipients come from migrant backgrounds. And it's not like 58% of welfare payments in Sweden go to immigrants. I'm just utterly baffled as to why the 500,000 plus South Koreans who signed that petition wouldn't want any of this coming to their country. They must not believe in tolerance, diversity, and human rights.
Tolerance, diversity, and human rights.
They must not believe in letting their culture and national identity be subsumed at the altar of political correctness. They must believe, and this is pretty shocking, in the integrity of borders and law. They must believe in South Korea staying South Korean. And can you imagine anything being more racist than that?
Now I want to explain what could lead to a second civil war. Okay, now what actually could lead to a second civil war, I don't think is any of these outside forces. I don't think that it's globalization. I don't think it's illegal immigration. I don't even think that it was the terrible Obama presidency, which I think really did exacerbate a lot of the gaps in the United States. I don't think economics is what's going to lead to a second civil war. You know, Victor Davis Hanson in National Review, he says, a steady 3 to 4% growth in annual GDP would trim a lot of cultural rhetoric. 4% unemployment will make more Americans valuable and give them advantages with employers. Measured, meritocratic, diverse, legal immigration would help to restore the melting pot. Reforming the university would help to mostly by abolishing tenure, requiring an exit competence exam for BA degrees. And then he gets to the one thing that I think is correct. Okay, here is the one thing that I think Victor Davis Hanson says that is correct. He's ignored it through most of the article, but this is where I think that he is right. He says, religious and spiritual reawakening is crucial. The masters of the universe of Silicon Valley did not, as promised, bring us New Age tranquility, but rather only greater speed and intensity to do what we always do. Trolling, doxing, phishing were just new versions of what Jesus warned about in the Sermon on the Mount. Spiritual transcendence is the timeless water of life. Technology is simply the delivery pump. We confuse the two. This I totally agree with. Okay, this is the part where he is totally right. One of the things that has happened is that we have polarized along technological lines because it is easy to sit behind your keyboard on Twitter and say mean things to other people you would never say to them in person. It's easy when you don't go to church to slander your neighbors as people without teeth, as Mark Caputo was doing. It is very easy when you don't actually have a community you feel a sense of belonging to talk about going to war with all of your neighbors. All that stuff is social isolation has actually increased in a time of social networking, which is one of the great ironies of the rise of technology. We spend less time with human beings and we spend more time online pretending to be with human beings and treating people how we would not want to be treated did we actually meet people in regular life. What's missing is the spiritual component, the sense that we're all in the fight together. And that's been missing for a while in the United States. That's nothing new. The problem is that all of the Civil War talk actually exacerbates the problem. And this is the problem I have with the Civil War talk. The Civil War talk, if you want to talk about a crisis of American conscience, I'm with you. If you want to talk about a crisis of American spirituality, I'm totally with you. If you want to talk about a crisis in the West of meaning and purpose, not only am I with you, I wrote an entire book on it. I wrote an entire book on this crisis of meaning, what we've lost, why we lost it. I think that we've lost a couple of things in the West. I think we've lost the idea of a Judeo-Christian value system that bound us all together, and we also lost the idea of reason as a universal solvent that was going to help bring us together and also grant us the capacity to talk with one another. And we've broken down into identity politics and subjectivism. I think there are a lot of things that have gone wrong with our culture, but talking about civil war only exacerbates the problem, because the problem with saying that we're on the verge of a second civil war is that it actually encourages you to look at people across the aisle from you and not see the common face of an American, but see somebody who is your enemy attempting to destroy the United States. And that's not to say that conflicts between left and right don't exist. They do. And I think the left is dead wrong on virtually all of these issues. I think fighting leftist principles is a deeply important thing, because I think the left is complicit in the destruction of these central ideals of America that bind us together. I think the left has forcibly attempted to destroy the Judeo-Christian fabric. I think that the left has abandoned reason on behalf of subjective feeling. But I also think that most people in the United States are not, quote unquote, on the left. I think most people in the United States simply are told certain things by the media, and they believe those things because members of the media say them. I think a lot of people in the United States don't even think about policy very often. They don't think about politics very often. And if they do think about politics, I think they are driven into a state of insanity by all of the talk of this sort of Civil War mentality. The war is on. America's on the verge of destruction. The greatest, freest country in the history of the world, most prosperous country in the history of the world. We're on the verge of chaos. That sort of talk, I think, makes things worse. I don't think we're on the verge of chaos, but I think that we have to look at the underlying trends and try to reverse them. I think that would be the best way to talk about this. We're not on the verge of the collapse of the United States. We are not. And Donald Trump is not a symptom of that, nor is he a cause of that. We are not on the verge of the collapse of the United States. 500 disgusting idiots marching in Charlottesville is not the collapse of the United States, right? Even the shooting of Congress people by an evil Bernie Sanders supporter, that is not the collapse of the United States, right? The United States is a lot more durable than that because it was built on these principles. What is the collapse of the United States is when we forget about this common fabric. I still believe most Americans believe in the certain set of decency brought about by Judeo-Christian values. Even if people don't go to church, I think they believe in those values. They just don't know where they came from, which means it's our job to reinstill those values. It's our job to talk about those values, to talk about where they came from, why they are important, why people should go to church, why people should go to synagogue. At the same time, we have to talk about why it is that reason is necessary, why it is that classical liberalism, the idea that we are free because we have certain inalienable rights, why our reason allows us to have a republic where we can sit and talk together, why that stuff is actually important. Right? Arguments over the tax rates are not going to destroy the United States. Abandonment of reason and abandonment of values are going to destroy the United States. And the problem is, once you get into a mentality that we are in a war, wartime mentality encourages people to abandon morality. People are at their worst in a war. And one of the weird things about the way that we perceive war in the modern world, because so few of us have actually been in the military, only a small percentage of Americans actually even know people who have been in the military or deal with people in the military on a regular basis. Because of that, we tend to think that war makes the best of people. When we watch war movies, we see, oh, look at the unity of the guys in Band of Brothers. Look how they came together. Look how, in a war, there's a common sense of purpose. This is why so many folks, particularly on the political left, like to talk about the war on poverty. People on the right will talk about the war on illegal immigration, the war on Christmas. We're constantly using the language of war because we think that war brings us together and refines us, that pressure turns us into a purer version of ourselves. The worst atrocities in the history of mankind have happened during war. The reason for that is because once you believe that you are fighting in a battle, once you believe that your life is at stake, once you believe that war is at your front door, you are willing to do almost anything in order to prevent yourself from losing that war. Once you believe that the country is one step away from its end, it's pretty easy to justify doing virtually anything. And I think that that's having a pretty significant impact, this sort of Civil War rhetoric, on how people think on both the left and on the right. So let's take an example. Over the last 24 hours, several members of the Trump administration have talked about Russian meddling in elections. And they talked about how bad it is. So Mike Pence, the vice president, he says that Russian meddling is offensive to democracy. Of course, he's exactly right.
The fact is, Russia meddled in our 2016 elections. Russia's goal was to sow discord and division and to weaken the American people's faith in our democracy. And while no actual votes were changed, any attempt to interfere in our elections is an affront to our democracy, and it will not be allowed.
Okay, so that's right. What Mike Pence says there is exactly right. And then Christian Nielsen, who's the Homeland Security Secretary, she comes out and she says election meddling is happening in real time.
Americans need to be aware that it's a very real threat. It's happening real time. FBI has lead on that. They have a task force. We support them. And we work with the private sector, such as Facebook, companies like Facebook, to try to pull down content that is inauthentic.
Okay, so there is a real problem with the Russians meddling in our election. Now, if you're a patriotic American who believes that Western civilization actually requires defense, you should be offended by the idea of a country like Russia attempting to meddle in our elections. The idea that Vladimir Putin, who's a thug dictator who murders dissidents, interfering in our elections should be offensive to you no matter where you stand on the political aisle. I was deeply offended when Barack Obama said to Dmitry Medvedev in 2012 that he wanted flexibility from the Russian government so that he could that if they were kind to him and didn't do anything, he would provide them flexibility in his next administration. It was disgusting. Russian interference in the election is a bad thing. But there's a new poll out today, and this is, I think, an outgrowth of a Civil War mentality. There's a new poll out today, and here was the question in the poll. If Russia were to help the Republicans or Democrats keep or win control of Congress in the November elections, do you think their actions would be appropriate, inappropriate, but not a big deal, or inappropriate and it's a big deal? So according to Republicans, people who lean Republican, fully 40% of Republicans say it would either be appropriate for the Russians to interfere in our elections to help Republicans win, or that it wouldn't be appropriate, but it wouldn't be all that big a deal if the Russians interfere in our elections to help us win. 40% of Republicans say that it's not that big a deal if the Russians actually interfered in our elections and we knew that they were interfering in our elections. 4 in 10. 55% say it's not appropriate and it would be a big deal, which means that's the correct 55%. Democrats now say 14% say that it would be inappropriate but not a big deal. 86% say it would not be appropriate and it would be a big deal. Okay, so that is a massive gap. That's a massive gap. Now, I'm going to talk in a second about why I think that those statistics are what those statistics are. I don't think that this is about Republicans are bad people and Democrats are good people or anything stupid like that. I think that there are a couple of explanations for this. So there are two factors that are leading to this disparate polling, right? So what the polling shows, again, is that 40% of Republicans think that if the Russians interfered in the elections to help Republicans maintain control of Congress in 2018, it wouldn't be a big deal. 14% of Democrats say that if the Democrats were helped by the Russians, it would be a not big deal. Okay, so why 40 versus 14? There are two reasons. Okay, reason number one is the most obvious reason, which is that the Republicans who are answering this poll are actually not answering the poll question. This is one of the big problems with polling of Republicans right now. Anytime a pollster mentions the word Russia, Republicans immediately trigger and they immediately go to, I'm going to deny that anything bad has ever happened with Russia because you guys are making such a big deal out of this Russian nonsense. You keep saying that the election was illegitimate. You keep trying to make this into Trump is a tool of the Russians. Well, F you, right? So this answer is basically F you to the media and the pollster who are asking questions. I think that really is what's driving this because honestly, I felt this feeling too. Like I went to a place called the Magic Castle up here in the hills and how it's a great place. It's really fun. There's a magician who actually has, I think, a show on Netflix coming out soon. Terrific magician. But at the very beginning, he made some joke about Trump. And I was so tempted to stand up and just start yelling at the guy because it's so irritating. It's all really, really irritating. So I think that part of that statistic that 40% of Republicans don't care if the Russians interfere in the 2018 elections, I think that statistic is largely driven by Republicans going, you know what, screw you, I'm not answering your question because you keep making a big deal out of this Russia stuff. Part of it is that a lot of Republicans really believe that if we are in the midst of a civil war, any and all means necessary to defeat the opponent are on the table. This is the danger of talking civil war. And I think Democrats felt the same way when they felt that Barack Obama was in danger. They felt that anything that helped defeat Barack Obama was a great evil that had to be fought at every possible turn. So riots in Ferguson, well, that was just a way of expressing discontent with the system. Riots in Baltimore, just a way of expressing discontent with the system. Well, Antifa, maybe they're a little bit extreme, but are they that extreme? Right? This sort of attitude now pervades the country. The belief that civil war is upon us is almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. Once you start saying that civil war is this far away, people start building up for war. People start girding their loins, getting ready for battle. And that means treating other people around them in more immoral fashion, not more moral fashion. So I think that's why I object to some of the civil war rhetoric, and I think that it's actually quite dangerous for the future of the country for us to keep talking like this instead of focusing on the fact that we do have this amazing edifice that we've built together and that with the grace of God has been built for us by people who came before us. What do we have to do to uphold that edifice as opposed to tearing it down? And yes, let's have the fights with the socialists. Let's talk about the foundational principles of the United States. But let's not pretend that we're on the verge of shooting each other in the streets because we actually are not. I also think that the more that Republicans talk like this, the more they're going to off-put the independent vote. I think that people in the middle don't want to hear this. Most people don't want to be bothered, is the truth. Most people want to be left alone. And people constantly shrieking in your ear that the Civil War is coming is not actually of benefit to you electorally. By the way, when the Civil War does come, if the Civil War were to come in, I think, several decades, I don't think that it would come from tyrannical Republicans cramming down their values. I think it would come more from tyrannical Democrats outlawing hate speech, outlawing religious practice, attempting to crack down on my church and my synagogue, attempting to take my child away from me if I don't teach them their preferred social policies, right? That's where things are really going to get bad. But I think it's going to be a long while before we get there because I still think that the vast majority of Americans don't believe like the radical left believes. That said, this is one of the reasons why it's important how we talk about politics. This is why the mannerisms of militants actually don't help us generate victory. They don't help generate political victory. What helps us generate political victory is making better arguments than the other side, calling them out when they make bad character attacks, calling them out for lack of character when they do those sorts of things. But the constant idea that we have to be weapons up all the time, eventually somebody's going to pull the trigger and things will get ugly at that point. The more weapons that go up, the better chance that somebody is going to pull the trigger. And that is a serious problem. Now, speaking of pulling the trigger, there is a crazy thing that is happening right now where a bunch of folks on the left are now attempting to ban 3D gun printing. We talked a little bit yesterday about the fact that folks in the media do not know what in the hell they are talking about when they talk about printing of 3D guns. They really think that I'm going to take my HP LaserJet and print out a gun in my house right now. Like they really think that that's a thing I can do, that I can just go into my library and I can print out a gun from my normal printer. Because they hear printing and this is what they think. That's not how it works. An actual 3D printing machine costs upward of $8,000 all the way up to $100,000. Nobody is sitting in their basement actually printing out fully plastic guns. That is illegal. You are not allowed to manufacture guns that are not detectable. That is just not something that happens. People have been manufacturing their own guns literally for centuries. People making guns in their house with gun-making kits. Most of those are made of metal. Most of the parts are coming from actual gun manufacturers. But the left is driving this narrative that the new great danger in the United States is going to be 3D guns. That's going to be the great danger. That's where all of the danger in the United States is coming from. So Senator Markey, who doesn't know legitimately a damn thing about guns, he was speaking yesterday. He says 3D guns are a national security risk.
In a world where a 3D printer cartridge has become as deadly as a gun cartridge. And that's because these downloadable firearms are available even to those who could not pass a background check. It's the ultimate gun loophole.
What in the world is he talking about? Ed Markey does not know what he is talking about. The idea there are a bunch of felons who are sitting in their basements with $100,000 printing machines for 3D plastic guns is just ridiculous. If a felon wants to get a gun, the easiest way to do it is just to buy it illegally. Really, it's going to cost you like $1,000 as opposed to, I don't know, $150,000 to manufacture a 3D AR-15 that fires 3 times before it breaks. This is so stupid. But a federal judge has now blocked 3D gun plans. So according to CNN, if you are looking to download the blueprints for how to make a plastic gun using a 3D printer, you can't yet get them online from a site distributing them legally. A federal judge Tuesday night blocked a settlement that would have allowed Defense Distributed, a Texas-based gun rights organization, to legally post blueprints for 3D printable guns. But hundreds of designs reportedly were downloaded before the judge's decision, meaning those designs are out there legally or not. Well, yes. I mean, the idea that you're going to shut down every site on the internet that is posting these blueprints is just asinine and a significant violation of free speech. The idea that you're, first of all, you can buy the Anarchist Cookbook right now at Barnes & Noble. You can go to Amazon.com and you can buy the Anarchist Cookbook, which actually includes bomb-making lessons. Okay, so the distribution of information is not the serious problem here. The distribution of information is not what is going to lead to the collapse of the United States. I'm much more fearful of the federal government stepping in and saying we are afraid that you're going to manufacture a gun in your own house. Therefore, we are going to regulate what kinds of sites are on the internet. By the way, everybody just went to an alternate site yesterday. They shut down one site and everybody just went to an alternative site. But this is my great fear. If tyranny is going to come in the United States, it's going to come from people who are so fearful of the liberty of Americans that they believe that the government should shut down all sorts of freedoms that we hold dear. Right? That's where tyranny is actually going to come from. It's not going to come from the idea that globalization and additional technology is exacerbating cultural differentiation, which leads to us picking up guns and going and invading the local Starbucks. That's not a thing that's really in the offing. And so, again, media ignorance on full display. They're just doing a wonderful job. Meanwhile, the President of the United States. Other things that I like. So I have to admit, this Ron DeSantis ad is so funny. So Ron DeSantis, who I'm friendly with, congressperson from Florida, he is now running for governor of Florida. I believe that DeSantis should win. I think he's a good candidate, and I think that he will make an excellent governor of the state of Florida. Really smart guy. His family is very charming. He cut this ad in an attempt to win the primaries in Florida. And obviously, he has to show allegiance to President Trump in order to win the primaries in Florida. So he goes over the top, and it's really, really funny.
Everyone knows my husband, Ron DeSantis, is endorsed by President Trump, but he's also an amazing dad. Ron loves playing with the kids.
Build the wall.
He reads stories.
Then Mr. Trump said, "You're fired." I love that part.
He's teaching Madison to talk.
Make America great again.
People say Ron's all Trump, but he is so much more.
Big league. So good.
I just thought you should know.
So I love the kind of tongue-in-cheek of it. And it is true, obviously. DeSantis has been a Trump supporter, and he will be an excellent governor. Trump himself has endorsed DeSantis, which will help DeSantis in the primaries. I think you're looking at the next governor of Florida in Ron DeSantis, which is just terrific. Time for a quick Federalist paper. So every week we go through a Federalist paper. We're all the way up to Federalist 39, so we're moving steadily through here. So James Madison wrote Federalist 39, and he is making the case for why the government of the United States ought to be a republic. And it's quite fascinating. Here's what he says. He describes why the U.S. is a republic and not a democracy. He says that a republic is a government which derives all its powers directly or indirectly from the great body of the people and is administered by persons holding their offices during pleasure for a limited period or during good behavior. It is essential to such a government that it be derived from a great body of society, not from an inconsiderable proportion or a favored class of it. Otherwise, a handful of tyrannical nobles exercising their oppressions by a delegation of their powers might aspire to the rank of republicans and claim for their government the honorable title of republic. It is sufficient for such a government that the persons administering it be appointed either directly or indirectly by the people, that they hold their appointments by either the tenures just specified. Otherwise, every government in the United States, as well as every other popular government that has been or can be well organized or well executed, would be degraded from the republican character. So recognize what he's saying there. What he's saying is what makes a republic is that we have a bunch of elected officials elected by the great majority of the public, and that these officials hold their offices for a limited period or during good behavior. This is a far cry from the bureaucratic government that has been instituted since the beginning of the 20th century in the United States. The legislature of the United States has become the withered arm of American government. The Constitution's Article 1 presents virtually all power in the form of the legislature. There's no question that Congress was meant to be, of all the branches, the most powerful. No question. And yet it has become in many ways the least powerful branch of the American government, which demonstrates we have moved away from an elected republic more toward a bureaucratic government that has created all sorts of tension inside the American system. It's the reason why people feel frustrated that government isn't doing what they want it to do, because your elected officials have kicked over all responsibility to a bunch of unelected, life-tenured bureaucrats over at a bunch of executive agencies. This is a serious problem. Madison continues by talking about how the nation was formed. The reason this is important is because it actually led to some arguments about the actual Civil War. So what he says is, the way that the nation was formed was the assent and ratification of the several states derived from the supreme authority in each state, the authority of the people themselves. The act, therefore, establishing the Constitution will be not a national, but a federal act. So he says the states basically made the United States because the formation of the Constitution had to be upheld on a state-by-state basis universally. And then he describes the republic this way. He says, the proposed Constitution is in strictness neither a national nor a federal Constitution, but a composition of both. In its foundation, it is federal, not national. In the sources from which the ordinary powers of the government are drawn, it is partly federal and partly national. And in the operation of these powers, it is national, not federal, meaning that it doesn't operate on a state-by-state basis. You treat all the states the same, according to the Constitution of the United States. It says in the extent of them, it is again federal, not national, meaning that you can't override the rights of the states. And finally, in the authoritative mode of introducing amendments, it is neither wholly federal nor wholly national. Now, the reason that this became an interesting battle is leading up to the Civil War, there was an argument, it was called state compact theory, that was made by members of the Confederacy, that basically, if the Constitution violated the original prescriptions that were signed off on by a variety of states, that those states had the right to withdraw from the Constitution. Just as if I sign a contract with you and you break the contract, I get to withdraw from the contract. They say the states were the signatories to the Constitution, and therefore, if you violate the rights of a particular state, that state has the ability to withdraw. The counter-argument was we have an amendment process to the Constitution. If you don't like how the government is acting, all you have to do is pass an amendment. You don't have the votes for this amendment. And so how exactly are you going to fight that? This argument, I don't think, is legally insignificant. I also think it has ramifications for today with regard to what is the exact purview of the states. I think that the state compact theory is not entirely wrong from a legal perspective. The problem was it was being fought over the great evil of the 19th century, slavery. And therefore, the moral imperative to destroy slavery was stronger than the legal imperative to maintain states' rights. And that had some dramatic ramifications for the federal government going forward, although the truth is the full destruction of state power really didn't happen until the middle of the 20th century with the rise of the federal bureaucracy. Okay, well, we will be back here tomorrow to break down all the latest. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show.